mention a quick statement regarding what Professor Sadowski mentioned is that so the concern after I have been in past 2 years in Professor Sadowski classes on the computational psychiatry and also thinking beyond the black box. The 2 years ago I don't know what called it Grand Tour. So I came to this conclusion about understanding different aspects of the brain and what are the capabilities and how it relates to philosophy and other aspects. But the concern I got after understanding about learning and memory in the brain, because it's my research now, is that I found how powerful human brain can be brainwashed by any type of teaching or a school of thought. And it becomes hugely, I understand it in a deeper understanding when Professor Patricia Churchland last night, when you mentioned that you are a big learner. In order to be a big learner, you need to be a very dumb baby or be a very, so that shows that human, after they give birth in the early childhood, they are just the visual pathway, every part of the brain is loose connection between neuron synapses. And then after the learning occurs in any society, in any culture, in any religion, so they become a person of that brainwash. And I am, because I'm from an Islamic background and I have a huge amount of Islamic and religious studying, so I memorized 100 pages of Quran, 1/6 of Quran. So that gave me an insight of what is happening in Quran, and then understanding about different school of thoughts in Islam, Shia versus Sunni, and then how in misinterpretation. So most of these fights and these things that you see is just because of a misinterpretation of a verse. That shows kindness. The problem is how they interpret the Quran and how they interpret. But those people who has been brainwashed by a master, they just follow that school of thought. So this is my concern, that after understanding the power of learning and memory, now the neuroscience community that are aware of this power should just make obligations or make awareness that, hey, people, be aware. You will get easily brainwashed by an unwise or not proven statement or science or language. And I love the science community because they don't say, anytime in that class I wanted to claim something, Patricia was telling me, is there any evidence or is there any survey or is there any study on that? You cannot just say something based on what you have experienced in your life. There should be a scientific experience. So that's the concern I got after these experience, the ability of humans to be brainwashed.
One of the problems, though, with that, and then we'll go to Lauren. This is another very recent piece by Jerry Grutman, who's not a civic person, in the New Yorker, and the headline is "Can Brain Science Help Us Break Bad Habits?" And you go through all of the stuff. You look at all the Walter Mischel, you look at the marshmallow stuff, and so on. Then you read the recent reports coming out about the Mischel stuff being wrong, and the problem is that this is all changing all the time. And I think that one of the points that you made earlier about reducing this chasm of between the communicators and the creators of science and technology, their capacities. This is a really essential problem, because if you're constantly publishing things which are showing what went wrong with the early social cognitive affective neuroscience experiments and the marshmallow experiment wasn't right and free will is this and so on and so forth, it's very confusing. It just is very confusing.
I think it's confusing. I'm sorry. Because... Okay, so I'm pointing a finger now, okay? I think it, not at you, but I think it's confusing because of... we've inherited all these categories, which were invented way before we knew anything about what was inside your head. We didn't even know it was made out of stuff that your liver's made out of. Okay, so there are all these categories of why do I do this and why do I do that? Well, and you make an interesting point, Mohammed, which is people can really do cognitive control. Anything can be pulled into mind. You can value it seemingly arbitrarily, and you can subvert all your biology to that. You won't go out to urinate when you have to go if you're thinking about something important, or you think you're going to get money and you want money, or you can go on a hunger strike. You can literally shut off your need to respond to basic signals for your sustenance on an idea. Okay, I don't know
The
any.
ultimate in that was suicide bombers.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes against all
Yep.
biological instincts, you would think.
That's a quick hunger strike.
But it happens fast.
But, no,
Yeah, that's right.
But
Pulling off the Band-Aid
actually,
fast.
it's very interesting, but I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard someone talk about it. And to understand that the motivation there is that the family of the suicide bomber gets a lot of benefits. Because, you know, they gave up a son or a daughter for the greater good. And so there's much more complexity there, and it has to do with social relationships and social bonds and so forth. That you know, and you're right too, though. You can to some extent control your physiology, but not forever, right? You at some point.
A shark wouldn't do that, or a deer,
Right.
or a lion, or a dog, or keep coming up. Okay, let's go to chimpanzees. The chimpanzees.
But okay, so.
If you go on hunger strike, if you go on hunger strike.
So Pat, you were going to tell us stories about the morality amongst animals, right? So, but there are cases of animals doing this, by the way.
Yeah. I think not exactly a hunger strike, but
But giving up your own food for another.
yeah, there are a number of animal behaviorist people, both in the wild and in captivity, who have done really careful studies. So it isn't anecdata, it's real data. And so the first story is about chimpanzees, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about rodents, because the rodent story is very surprising, because we think of rodents, well, you know, you just set a trap. I mean, they're vermin. They don't have real feelings like we do. I mean, they don't have moral motivation like we do. So the chimpanzee story is an in the wild story, and the work was done by a primatologist, Christoph Besch, and they discovered many things about the social life of chimpanzees, but the surprising discovery was he recorded at the Ngogo Reserve in Africa 5 distinct cases where male chimpanzees adopted an orphan baby. Either the mother died or she was killed or something of that kind. Now, the biologists in the crowd immediately said, yes, but I bet he was their biological father. So Besch and his graduate students, expecting that would be the question, went out and collected the pee of the dads, the adopted fathers, and they discovered in none of the cases were the adult males the biological father of the adopted baby. Now, adopting a baby is a huge obligation. I mean, it's not like just maybe sharing a nut today. It's a big deal. And so I think many people found this very surprising, especially because you and I have talked a little bit about this too, is that it wasn't an instance of the kind that biologists like, namely, I'm the male biological father, I'll adopt this baby because it increases my fitness. It helps pass on my genes. It's not a case of that. And yet, he puts out for it. That is, he incurs a cost to himself in order to help another. Now, the rodent case, I think, is kind of interesting. So this was done in Peggy Mason's lab in Chicago. So you have a big round space. And in the middle of the space, you have a plexiglass trap. And the trap has a little door, which is not easy to open, but can be opened with a certain amount of fiddling. You have 2 rats who have been housed together. And I'll tell you why that's important in a moment. You take one of them and you stuff it in the trap and you close the door. You take the other one and you put it in the space. Now, as you know, rats have to much prefer to hang out around the perimeter, around the wall. They don't like to go into an open space. They're more vulnerable. But his pal is sitting in there going, and he overcomes his fear. He goes and he works and he works and he works, and he finally is able to open the trap, and out comes the rat. And he does this. They try it on several occasions. And people say, well, you know, maybe he just didn't like the squealing. So they think, well, let's, in the space, we'll put the trap here, we'll put food, we'll put some chocolate chips down there and see what happens. and stuff. Put the other guy in, he comes along, he knows the food is there, and then he opens the trap. Before he takes a single morsel, he opens the trap, they come out, and the two of them go, and together they eat. That's as good an example of sharing food. But on the xenophobia question, here's the next thing they did. So now they take a rat, unbeknownst to the guy who opens the trap, and they stuff him in the plexiglass trap, close it up. Now they take him, put him in there. He hangs around on the perimeter. He doesn't go. He won't go and help. So that night, they take the two of them, the stranger and the lock opener, they put them together in the same cage, and the next day they take the stranger, bung him into the trap, take the trap opener, put him in, and now he goes and he opens the trap and lets him out. So it's kind of interestingly subtle social behavior on the part of a mere rodent that indicates, I think, that there's something, I don't really care if we don't call it moral, but there is something that is at least a precursor to or is a rough analog of the kind of morality that we see in primates. But there are lots and lots of other examples, but I think those two will sort of, give you the flavor.
So a bit of a tangent at this point, but it was kind of bringing in Muhammad and Marlies and like all the different ideas. And we were talking a lot about religion, but something that I'm really interested in is kind of like the society norms, especially in the U.S., being how diverse we are and the minority groups, and how in those situations when people are overcoming those societal barriers, is that a change within their morality, allowing them to overcome those limitations, or is it more of like a societal responsibility that we need to like encourage, be it affirmative action, or obviously that's a legal example, but I just say this coming from being like a first-gen Latina in a field that I'm like, there's no one who also looks like me. So is that, I guess I'm just curious on your take on if that like a personal overcoming, or is it all these other features that I had zero control over, and is it just luck almost? I don't know. I was just kind of curious where we could take kind of this religion idea and being brainwashed, these societal things, and how do we almost undo that brainwashing?
Well, I think it's very subtle, and I think there was a particular experiment that was done in Reed Montague's lab that I think I may have mentioned last night. But the basic idea was that if you set someone's expectations of their reward fairly low, and you set somebody else's expectation of their reward fairly high, then, and you run that for a few trials, then this guy comes to expect high and this guy comes to expect low. They think that's normal. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take this guy and give him, let's say 10 Mars bars, and you're going to lift this guy and give him exactly the same, 10 Mars bars. Now, the high expectation guy, is he going to be disappointed or happy? He's disappointed. He used to get 15. What about this guy? Is he disappointed or happy? He's thrilled to bits. He used to get 5 and now he gets 10. So our norms are greatly influenced by the expectations that we acquire, or that our wonderful reward system acquires as a result of experience in the world. And those experiences can get extremely complicated. They can be normative in their nature. We aren't even aware of it. And an example that I sometimes use has to do with fashion. So when I was in 7th grade in school, I was extremely happy because I had a pink felt skirt with a poodle on it and a pair of saddle shoes, and I thought I just looked. Now I look at these pictures and I think, how is it possible to look so stupid? And but people who are more sensitive to fashion than I will look at their closet from, let's say, 5 years ago and think, God, that's so 5 years ago, out. And yet when they bought it, they thought it was just magnificent. Our norms can change in these subtle ways. There was never a day when I sat down and said, pink felt skirt with poodle on it is dumb. Never. But my norms, of course, had changed. Now, they do, I think, also in a social context with regard to many other things having to do with sexual behavior. Oh, yeah, sorry. Having to do with sexual behavior, for example, but having to do with how we get on, what our assumptions are about other people, something about, how inequalities should be dealt with. And a certain amount of turmoil and ferment is a good thing. I mean, we shouldn't always wring our hands and say, oh, no, we're divided. I mean, we should wring our hands when there's sort of an excessive moral outrage and people are just looking to bank it somewhere. But on the other hand, a certain amount of disagreement is a very healthy thing. If we're all agreeing too much, and I don't know, that's when I start to get a little bit worried.
Mia, you haven't said anything yet. No, Tracy. Oh, there you are.
I'd like to go back to the discussion about religion and some of the ways that religion has been used either are now what we would view as immoral or morally. First off, there's definitely, like what you said, Mohammed, you get a big text that was written long ago that has a bunch of things that people are willing to follow. You can string any kind of justification out of that, and so a lot of these issues can be explained by looking at that. But there's this other thing that's been talked about a lot in the past 2 days that I think is interesting about the problem being with kind of a rule-based morality versus this reward-based, looking at, okay, what's going to be the best for me and those in my empathetic sphere in this particular situation. And you brought up that there's kind of both that happens in people's moral judgments, that you have consequences that people look at and then values. And so with the example of the babies, that as a society we're not really willing to grow 20 babies and then harvest their organs to save 200 people, even though looking at the consequences, that might be the best thing. There's this other thing that may have started as okay, they're in my empathetic sphere, I'm looking at the consequences of how this is going to help the babies or hurt them. This is now, if you look at all of those people, which you could say, okay, I value the lives of all of those people, even still, you're not really looking at, in a reward-based evaluation, what's going to reward the most people. And so that value of we're not going to kill 20 babies seems to be more like a rule that gets ingrained into us that can be kind of pitted against this reward system. And so there seems to be a more complex dynamic there. The rule-based almost seems to be like a natural thing that gets ingrained to us, and that's really central to the way that we think of moral issues. So where does that come from, and how do we reconcile that with the way that we want to evaluate what a good moral judgment is?
I have a question. So if that's a good example. So suppose that it was one baby, and you were going to save Washington, D.C. Would you kill that baby?
Probably, yeah.
You would kill the baby? Okay. How about Sandy? What's that? Not 3. I mean, I'm going to lower the outcome side. So the outcome side. So let's go down to 100,000 people, not 8 million.
Well, I
So,
guess.
so what we're talking about
Yeah.
is using the utility, some
Right.
measure over the value of one act to sort of balance a ledger with something else, an outcome, another act, et cetera. And so I'm just trying to find your price point.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when you
Right.
put it that way, I'm going to make a point on this. I mean, so there's some choices where there are no price points, where that whole sort of utility model of valuing things and then choosing, predicated on those values, breaks down. That's the movie Sophie's Choice. You know Sophie's Choice, this movie? Okay, so you have 2 children. Which one are you going to kill? We're not going to put them both on there. I guess she kills the girl. They shoot the girl.
The question they always ask is that if you want to choose between your parents, if you want to choose, it was when I was thinking from my childhood. If they ask you should have one, which one do you choose, your father or your mother? It's like the value, if you want to think about the value.
Yeah, so it's a hard moral choice, right? two things of infinite value pitted against one another. So there is no choice. So there is no choice, right? And there's no utility function to grade that out, nor for a single baby. But let's just, so one baby, a town of 50,000. You're still killing the baby?
Well,
We're just,
so-
come
yeah,
on.
sure.
It's just an exercise.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
But-
Let's go 1 versus 8. You're going to have to do it with your own hand. I mean, let's make it a hard choice. Let's make it a hard choice. Could you kill a baby to save 2 other babies?
Well,
For the mere reason that on the one hand there are 2, and on the right hand there are 2, and then on the left hand there.
right.
Pardon? Sort of the trolley problem.
Right.
The trolley problem is asking the trolley problem is slightly asked the question of if you are directly responsible versus an indirect. It's a proxy problem.
Right. Now you're looking at direct,
Okay, you don't.
like,
Okay, well we'll bifurcate it there too. Somebody kills it for you.
well, this,
People make decisions like we hear this on the news every night. Oh, we're going to withdraw troops from X. Okay, how many people died the next day? Well, there's some people that died. So that decision caused people. People make these decisions every day of the week. You have to vote for people. Why did I buy a leisure suit in the 1970s? That was never a good idea. When you were saying that, I was just going, a leisure suit is not something I bought, but something I was forced to wear by my mother. And I thought, this was not a good idea in any generation. It could never have been. Platform shoes, maybe? Well, let's go back to the baby. I think there are lots of choices that we make that don't fit this kind of utility maximization or minimization model at all.
Right.
And I don't have a bromide for it. I don't have a little simple ditty.
No, and
A rule. I don't have a simple rule.
I think that's a really, really deep point because and I'm really glad that this, sort of came out on this, because we were sort of talking about this in a broader context, that behavioral economics doesn't really have a way of thinking about this either.
At all.
Or at all. So for all you guys who are, sort of young and snappy and, all that, this is an interesting problem. I don't have an answer for it. I know that there is no rule that tells you what you should do in the Sophie's Choice case, or in many other difficult cases either. There is no fundamental rule. Kant thought it would be nice if there was one, and he basically bombed. And Jeremy Bentham thought that maximizing aggregate happiness would do it, and he bombed. There is no rule. We live with this conflict between a variety of values and norms and preferences and desires and uncertainties. But if there is a way of sort of making progress on that question, I would love to see it. I think it's really deep and important.
You obviously have to have more engagement and more discussion and more conversation. If you take a society that you use as an example, like the Inuit, then at one time the Inuit were happy people, right?
Absolutely.
They've now got one of the highest suicide rates.
Oh, yeah, okay. But that's a wholly different story.
Well, they're also said to be lonely, and it's affecting young people the most, and so on and so forth. That's a complete change in society.
There's alcohol problems.
Yes, yeah.
It's much more complicated.
Yes, no, it is a very complicated story, and it has to do with their history and so forth. But the issue that Reid has raised about calculating utilities and the economists' predilection for preference for using that as a model to explain human behavior in general needs revamping.
And economic councils that counsel
Yes,
political leaders
yes.
to make policies for whole nations that have a lot of money. These are not trivial issues. One of the things in my mind that makes it hard now is that, I don't know, maybe you could make rules up back when there were 100 million people in the U.S. Let's just take the United States, because I just know more about it. Now, you get to hear everyone's night thoughts. There's Twitter No, I mean and there's this rumble in the background of all these things pressing in on you. So you take a creature which is already a bag of conflicting preferences, ascribing to rules on the one hand and having these drives on the other hand, and now you hook them into these other people in ways that their nervous systems were not designed to deal with kinetics that have impact because it's not linear. There are these dynamics that go on, and now you're going to make moral choices in that context. And I just think that the utility maximizing or utility-based decision-making models long ago got creaky, and now they're fully, the boat's filling with water. Okay, and so I'm just echoing what Pat was saying, which is for your generation, these are interesting issues. Not to take soft positions on, but to take feet on the ground positions, that people have these instincts inside their nervous systems, they're in conflict with each other, and it's not clear how to navigate it.
So Reed raised this issue of how instant communication, basically, throughout the whole world, this is really the first time this has happened, has really changed the game. And the reason is this communication device amplifies a single voice. In other words, you have all of the followers, and you can get them to have followers. It's like a nuclear chain reaction, and that can really, it's like a wildfire. It could just blaze. And I know several examples in my own just recent history here of how that plays out. By the way, this is something that is underlying all of these problems. Language. Language is a very imperfect instrument. It's very imprecise, number one, and the very same sentence can be interpreted differently, if it's written in the Bible, the Quran, radically different. But worse, you can lie. Language is not necessarily going to get you to the truth, because and now here comes the amplification. In the old days, well, if you had some leader who basically lied to the troops, you might affect the small tribe, but that's not going to spread to the next tribe, right? But now, when you have radio, you can affect everybody who's listening to the radio, which is amplified by a million. And now with Twitter and with YouTube and all these other devices, we're talking about billions. We don't even understand the dynamics yet. There are people who are trying to figure this out, but it's a whole new world that you're entering, and it's really, we have I think a real problem that is we can see it popping up here and there, and I'm not sure. I mean, Reed is, I think. I think you kind of opted out. You were saying that you're glad that you don't have to deal with this.
I have a 16-year-old who goes to Snapchat, Instagram, a whole variety of things.
I have a question, but maybe. But it's related to this.
So she has these problems that come up, which relate to the way people you post these pictures and people say mean things to you, and what do you do about this, and who do you punish, and what what do I say to her? I go, wow, yeah, maybe that seems a little mean. I don't know. Well, what should I do? I have no clue. Aren't you my father? Aren't you supposed to have advice for this stuff? And I just think, I don't really know how to think about that. I don't know how to think about people. We're pretty soon, it's going to be a moral issue about turning machines off and killing software systems. We're not far from that. And we're not far from being sophisticated enough for them to say, please don't turn me off. Right? Don't turn me off. Nope. Don't destroy those nodes that don't cut my nodes back to 50 million because I won't be able to think about myself anymore. That's coming. That kind of stuff is coming. I think your generation is going to have to equip yourself to deal with stuff like that. Synthesized movies, fake political ads. These have apparently had real consequences in just the last few years. What do we do about that? In a society that values free speech? I don't know. I mean, the Russians can post whatever the Russians want to post. Unless you can trace it back to Russia, it's free speech. It's just a political opinion. It could be a bad political opinion. Is that influencing our election? Well, yeah, but not any more than it's legal. What do? You make a law up that you can't have an anti-government opinion,
I have a question that answer you, but after.
I'm just going to change it for a minute if you want to go ahead.
So before you change the topic, so I had a question, Professor Sanofsky, and also a partial answer to this problem of moral, how you make the choice between killing a baby or two. So there are lots of knowledge. If we have more knowledge about that question, then it's easier to answer. So what is the background genetic history of these two babies or two babies here? I mean, what is their chances to get psychiatric disorders and others? Lots of questions about their family, their history, who are their parents of these people. It makes you easier, help you, how much money they have, or it helps you to make the moral decision easier. And human brain, I mean, as a personal experience of human brain, has problem to aggregate thousands of information. We just make the most important information. It is one baby. It is two baby. At the most, who is the parents of these two? But AI is going to solve the problem. It's a question for Professor Sanofsky if he approved my point, that I think artificial intelligence is going to solve these partially, these moral choices and all of these. So Russia makes a tweet, the other person is reading that. So an AI system that read this statement and know about the background of Russia, background of you, and some input from you is going to help humans to make decisions that are more accepted through their moral, internal moral system. So this is my answer, that AI is going to help by this power, easier aggregating more information about something and make a decision that is more accepted through our moral behavior.
Wow, I completely disagree.
So with what we
I'm completely counter to that. I don't think any amount of knowledge for me would let me distinguish between killing one baby and another baby. And that's where I would stand on that.
Okay, but I want to hear your reasons.
My reason is because those are two, because there's,
One baby against the other, and then you
because it's not an economic choice in the traditional sense of the word. It's not a choice that I can convert to a single number, compare the numbers, and then say, well, this number is really well established because I had 1,000 pieces of information that went into getting it. And this number is also well established because I had 1,000. Before, I only had 3. The numbers have no meaning when it comes to things that you consider to be of infinite value, which would be your babies. Okay.
This one has a high chance to get autism. This one has a clear.
This one is somebody's child, and that one is somebody's child.
But you see, I understand the love of you. Okay, you are seeing that they are.
No,
equally
not love.
parents
I don't.
love them equally.
No, not love. You could do this for strangers. Humans routinely run into traffic to save other people's children. No genetic test beforehand. No, what kind of future did that kid have beforehand? In fact, the kid's making a really bad decision. They may have a bad future coming. They're running into traffic. Quit playing in traffic, kid. So I completely disagree with that. And in fact, I would think if we handed that kind of thing over to an automatic machine that I didn't trust, I think before we ever did anything like that, we're going to have to learn how to install one of these that we agree with or like or value into an AI system. And then it's a discussion, right? It's a gray discussion. So I don't see it as simply as, what is this early childhood? Oh. Wait. So, wait.
Well, I have some answers to that, but let's finish it.
Well, let's finish it.
This is fine.
Well, I think so what is the difference between us and a judge? So a judge in the court is aggregating lots of information, and to the best of their rules and their brain ability to look at the evidences, they try to make the fairness and the moral actions. They don't want to do an unmoral.
A judge is
So you are.
a judge is just interpreting the rule book. A judge.
I understand, but the evidence is not 100% clear. Everything is gray in most of these
But
circumstances.
judge is going by. Yeah, exactly. Judge is going by a rule book, by a penal code, by the constitution. The judge has to consult that rule book. It's not the case for human beings to, like, when they're making those decisions. We don't have a rule book.
But we have the moral rule book that we try based on, yeah.
Just to defend you a little bit, before you came in, we had a whole round of what are moral rules, what are ethical rules, where do they come from?
Yeah, I have been in the.
Conventionality of rules, and et cetera. But your rendering of this simple economic model would be, we would have to vote on it.
It's not about economic. I mean, I don't care about the economic part. It's more about the. It's not about the economic. I think it's more about the knowledge you have, aggregating the more information about the history of two cases, and then you decide.
Why is more knowledge more valuable than less knowledge in making such a choice?
Yeah, because.
What if you
Yeah.
would find that this baby is going to die in a couple of months? You didn't know that with your 3 data points, but you know that with your 10 data points.
Well, actually,
I think that's what he would say.
That's what he's trying to say. If the baby's going to die in 3 months anyway, and you could kill that baby now to save 2 babies, wouldn't you kill that baby?
Well, that's a different case. But
I think that's what he's arguing.
This case just came now. Before, the case was about autism, not about this.
but actually, I want to add some. So I think there is a religious story that says one of the prophets, I don't remember the name, like kills that baby because he has this knowledge that he's gonna be a very like bad guy when he grows up and he's gonna kill a lot of babies. But
The name of that prophet.
okay,
The Terminator.
yeah.
So it was, I mean, yeah, it's a story that baby is going to raise up with the, it was when Prophet Musa, peace be upon him, was walking with that very knowledgeable master, and then that person did this stuff, and then said to Prophet Musa that, do not ask me about the reason of this. And then he walked to somebody and he killed that person, and then Prophet Musa said that, explain about the reason of this, why you killed somebody without any reason. And he was saying that this is the reason is that person will grow up and then will do that bad stuff, kill the parents, and then I stopped that in advance. Okay.
That wouldn't hold up in court.
Yeah,
Of course, I
but
mean, that was a things between two prophets.
yeah, I want to add something. Just I was thinking that like thinking about morality and ethics and all of this is a luxury of like living, for example, in the U.S. So I lost my dad recently, and I had to go back to my home country, which is Iran, after 7 years and live there for 2 months. And so it was a very like interesting experience because, well, on one hand, I can see that people in Iran, they live more by rules, and it's easier for them to live by rules other than thinking about moral things. And on the other hand, like comparing to 7 years ago that I came from my country, it's getting much poorer, and people are having a hard time just surviving. And I can see the moral and the ethics in the society just going down. And well, you start caring more about like money and how you survive in that society, other than like even in the very simple things like driving. They care more about you here than in Iran. If you're passing a street, even the drivers don't care that much about you. So I was just thinking that I can see a very different environment there comparing to here, like in terms of the value system, and even I see a lot of like references to the rules and to the like the value system, other than like referring to what is moral or what is ethical to do. But that's just one point that I wanted to add.
So you said that it's not economical, but I said that, I mean, it's more information. I believe this. You should bring some reasons that it has nothing to do with information. I mean, because all decisions human brain make is based on some information we receive. I mean, even if it's.
I disagree with that. I would say the main theme of one of the themes of this book is that Well, it depends what you mean by that. But one of the themes of the book is that biology is a deep story that started being told way before there were humans. And so we have all these instincts that aren't necessarily collecting information in the way you mean it, I think, if I'm understanding you. I'm not sure I'm understanding you, but you make choices based on that. You don't weigh choices you can show, the one thing behavioral economics can show is that humans are a profoundly inconsistent machine with respect to information. And so while I understand the straw man that you're building, it's a straw man. It's not a real situation with a real human, because there's no sense of saying, oh, you have more knowledge or you have less knowledge, and that's just going to inform it better. That's just not the way people work. It's not our fault we work that way. We work that way because we were built that way. Kept us alive.
Can I add a comment to what your guys' discussion really quick? Just because I think it's interesting that you guys are considering this in such a perspective. But if we change that again, if we kind of switch the tables to, because we're already living in this type of situation where we have the choice to donate our organs in the case of our death. For whatever reason, we have made that decision that we want to help the greater society in that way after we die. And I think that the question then would not be harvesting babies for that point, for that purpose, but it would be taking that decision that in the case that my baby did encounter some life-threatening situation, I could then petition for the donation of their organs. But so it's not so much as like an exploitation, which is, I think, like a more contradictory way of looking at, or even just contentious in a way, to then just making it a decision that if in the case that my baby passed away, I could give those organs up for donation. So I don't know if you guys had any comments on that, maybe in that perspective.
You have an instinct. You have a series of things in your head that are not well explained that changes the rate at which you'll do that by a factor of 2, whether or not you're asked to opt in or opt out. So if I ask you, when you sign up, let's just assume you're the organ donor. You get a license. Do you want to be an organ donor? Okay, I don't check it. Okay, that's opting in. Okay, you're opting in. That's about 20, 30%. Okay, if instead you offer the choice in a slightly different way, you say you're already signed up as an organ donor. Now you have to opt out. Then it's an 80% non-opt-out rate. So you go from a factor of 3 or 4. Well, is that a moral decision, or is that a? I mean, people have explanations of it, and they write chapters in economics books over it. But that is a huge effect. That's a huge effect. Now, if instead you were the proxy for your baby, I assume that when you do it on behalf of your baby, it's the same thing, opting in versus opting out. I don't understand it, but that's a case where more information isn't the thing making the difference. It's sort of the packaging.
But so I guess what I'm just adding in is the choice to do it now, because instead of just saying, oh, you don't have a choice, we're just going to harvest your life or your organs, and then whatever else becomes of you, becomes of you. But so then that choice then is, I guess, where we eliminate that unethical behavior. And then even though that statistical is significant, it brings up the question of, well, how many people are inclined to do this, yes or no? And then what is the acceptance rate of it, yes or no?
But the thing is that I think you're right that there are other ways of handling organ donation than growing babies. But we brought up the growing baby case. Yeah, we agree on that, for sure. We brought up the baby case to illustrate a point about utilitarianism, about the rule that says an action is right to the extent that it maximizes aggregate happiness. And there are lots of other ways of showing that there's something wrong with that rule. And not only that maybe we ought not to follow the rule, but in actual fact, and this is really, I think, what's deep about Reid's point, humans don't follow that rule. They often incur a cost to themselves in order to sustain a particular value. So that the model that economists really like, because they can make it into an algorithm, that's part of the reason anyway, the model that economists like to explain human behavior is flawed. That was the kind of point of the baby organ story. It wasn't that we couldn't find a better way of doing it. I mean, we can probably grow organoids now that will, produce a kidney, so, and all that. But the really worrisome issue is that there is this sort of disconnect within behavioral economics about how humans, A, ought to behave, and B, in fact, behave. And if we persist in that model, we're going to miss something very deep about the nature of our biology. And that was kind of, I think, why I want to stay with this example that worries me.
I see your point now.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you.
So we have another
That helped
person here.
clarify
Yeah,
things.
I'm kind of
Laura.
branching off of that and thinking kind of the future, this big problem that we're going to be facing, and trying to think of how we can use this knowledge and gain that. And in the way that, do we feel everything we're learning about consciousness, is it something that we can educate in the younger generations, the children, to almost not avoid these problems, but mitigate the issues? Do we see that being maybe a frontier of how we battle this?
Education. You're saying
Yeah.
education might be the solution.
On children now. I'm wondering, I know it's very out there, this is future thoughts, obviously things that we need to think about, but I'm just curious what you guys think.
And while Mike's down there, Mia, I mean, you work in a department.
Right, so I wanted to
You work
ask,
in a department.
not about education, but like how you think new methods in how you think new methods in neuroscience will help us answer these questions, like maybe intracranial, like studies with behavioral economics paradigms, or like what we can do from that perspective.
I'm sorry. I didn't encode a question there. I was.
Oh, yeah,
what?
well, so like how will new methods in neuroscience, like simultaneous recordings, help us get at these like nuances?
It's going to make it a lot worse. I mean, it's going to make it a lot worse. I mean, all of a sudden, people. So one of the things we're doing is we take people who are being monitored for epilepsy with depth electrodes, okay, which is a shocking number of people in North America. They're like 3.5 million people with epilepsy. A full 35% of them aren't well controlled and become candidates for stereo EEG depth recordings. They bring them in, they take them off their meds, they let them seize, but they're in there for like 2 weeks sometimes, 8 days, 10 days, 2 weeks. I mean, as bad as that is for them, it's an opportunity for really sort of turning all these very interesting cognitive questions, which are also institutional questions about how we treat each other and what we can actually avoid, we're turning it right back down on the detailed neurobiology and being able to record local field potentials, and in our case, we're recording really fast fluctuations in neuromodulators. And we have a project where we're asking the question, can we take recordings of dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and a couple of other neuromodulators from hundreds of sites in a human brain, and guess how you feel? Track your feelings. Track stuff you'd call emotions. Really just ask, are we able to decode that? So I don't know the answer to that, but that's going to come, and we'll figure out a way to do those kinds of things non-invasively, and so this stuff is coming faster than I would have ever guessed. And I'm just glad I'm going to be at retirement age by the, or actually, I'm not going to retire, but I'll be too stupid, and I'll be out of, because, yeah, you just kind of fall over one day.
What was the opening reaction? You said it was going to be too hard, or it's going to get harder.
When I say hard, I mean gray. I mean, we were not going to have these kind of fun little examples because the real world would be like you would never. It's a horrific situation to act like Sophie's choice is a choice That's a misnomer, right? That's not the point of that. The point of that is there's some things that don't have prices on them. It's just going to be so gray. You know, they're going to be like weapons. They're going to be like nuclear energy. If you use it in a certain way, maybe it's really good, and if you use it another way, it's really, really awful. You will want to know. How many times has somebody pointed out something to you where you go, oh, I don't know what I think about that, and they ask you a question and it frames it for you. You're going to go, oh, okay, well, how do I know what I think till I hear what I say? Well, how do I know what I think until I hear myself thinking? And now you can stream all this data out of your own head. It makes the choices we make a little harder, more informed. They're more informed but harder. Yeah.
So also more information sometimes causes.
That's right. Yeah, Yeah, I mean when you're totally ignorant of two things, you can flip a coin. When you get a little information about one side or the other, then you start going, well, I don't know. And then when you have a lot of information about it,
the problem of aggregation, as I said. So that is
that's right. That is a problem. I would agree with that.
Yeah, no, I just have this worry that things are getting very gloomy. In the room. And so you know, there are a couple of ways to think about this. I actually think that the more we understand about the nature of human decision making and about things that we call moral values and so forth, I think it will sort of take some of the hard edge of moral arrogance and soften it up. I really do. And that pertains particularly to those who are apt to follow a leader that they think is particularly charismatic and spiritual and has better moral knowledge than any of the rest of us could ever have. So I like to think that that's a positive kind of thing. The other thing that I find really helpful is to read about life in the Middle Ages, when there was the plague, and there wasn't indoor plumbing, and everybody got smallpox in the 18th century, and then including kings, and then of course when the sailors returned from America, everybody got syphilis and died the most horrible death, and it cheers me right up because at least those are things that we don't have to deal with. And I mean, in my own lifetime, my mother worked as a bush nurse way off in the north, where they had rare access to painkillers and no antibiotics, and women died in childbirth as a regular thing. And we actually don't see that much anymore. So I mean, there are hard problems ahead of us that are kind of different from those in my cohort and your cohort. But I don't think we should just decide that we may as well forget the whole thing and just go surf. Although surfing is good too.
Say the gloomy moment was when I mentioned the leisure suit. That's what I thought was going to happen.
Well, I'd love to see a picture of that.
My turn.
Yes,
I will grab this.
So we have 3 minutes left.
Right. My question's evolved so many times I forgot what it was. But I wanted to connect some conversation about learning, brainwashing, the future, and the cultural context you gave about that Facebook question. There's a really interesting quote in this article. The author is listening to two guys talk at one of these humane technology conferences. And one of them says, "This couldn't have happened 2 years ago. Silicon Valley wasn't the right place." The other guy interrupts him to say, "Man, this couldn't happen 2 months ago." And there's this sentiment that everything is happening now and that there are new ideas to find and we are just facing forward or just facing right now. There's a loss of history. There's no interest in looking backwards at context. And we've got to tie that into looking forward, how to bring those things back. But it's really interesting to hear people talk about going into Barrio Logan to look for new ideas to help the community. What do you mean new ideas? The community exists. There are people in it. They have the ideas. That was a really interesting take on the Silicon Valley. I don't even know.
There's other things as well. I think a lot of these things, to echo what Pat was saying, here's a piece from the current Scientific American, which deals with a number of studies. Social media has not destroyed a generation. You hear all the terrible stories, all the pieces that came out about cell phones. And obviously, some of it's true, some of it, but it appears from some of the research that's now being done as though that people are getting slightly over that and are not being so depressed and so on and so forth. So maybe, as with the Me Too stuff, there's an uproar, the pendulum swings in one direction, and when it swings back, it's in a better middle than it was before. So there's a certain optimism. I think the one problem people are worried about is the relentless pace of this, which is happening in all these various fields, the computational.
Just turn it on.
And we talk about technologies amplifying voice, like a tweet can reach so far. But a tweet is filtered by so many things. I mean, words or language have so many problems. A tweet is infinitely worse, infinitely less powerful. So there may be a lot of reach there,
Oh,
but...
no, you don't know what a tweet storm is until it happens.
We'll have to hear about that. But, I mean, maybe the people aren't taking this as seriously.
But didn't Plato and Socrates actually dislike writing coming in because it was so firm and putting things into fixed things, and they liked the discussion?
Too committed.
So that you could have the back and the forth and find out what the real truth was.
You wouldn't have to work
written
hard at memorizing
something down.
your position.
There it is. I mean, damn this writing stuff.
Well, Aristotle loved writing. He did a lot of it.
Well, Plato and Socrates.
Okay, I have one last question that is maybe rhetorical to kind of wrap up this conversation.
How
but
will you know?
So my question is this. Do we stunt scientific discovery in fear of immoral behavior and use of what we're doing? So some context is, as we have these scientific and technological advancements, it was a lot more difficult to kill a person hundreds of thousands of years ago, or thousands of years ago, or when the gun was invented, it became a lot easier. When an atomic bomb was invented, it became a lot easier. Now we have drones, so you don't even have to look at the people. And then we are sitting here, a lot of us at the forefront of neuroscience and neurotechnology and neuroengineering, and you have things like changing human behavior at a fundamental level with technological input. And so obviously we probably won't stop, but there's the kind of quote that's thrown around on the internet a lot that we were so busy wondering if we could, not looking at if we should.
So,
Jurassic Park.
That's why. Yeah, it is. It is. And it's relevant.
No. This is a perennial problem. And let's just take one of your examples. So, nuclear weapons. Okay. So there's no doubt that it can kill millions of people, and we did it once. We haven't since then.
Twice.
Well, at one time in history. Whenever you introduce a new technology, it can be used for good and evil. Every technology. And how it's used is something that humans have to decide. And in this particular case, we managed to get the whole world at one point to say, let's set it aside and let's not use it. And so this happened, I remember, in Silomar when recombinant DNA was first made available to biologists, and it looked as if you can create new biology, new creatures, and you could create a pandemic of some sort by manipulating a virus. And so the scientists got together and they realized, well, let's be careful here. Take steps very carefully and try to have containment facilities until we know more. And here we are. This is now, it's, 70 years later or something. We have a vigorous biotech industry where people are actually using these tools in a routine way for good. This problem they came up recently in China where they're using CRISPR, to change the genes. This is a big red line, and the world reacted very, very rapidly, and even in China, this guy is now in jail. I don't know if there's a law against this, but he's certainly not able to go ahead. So I think that you have to be very whenever someone says that AI is going to replace us, right? Or this is going to weaponize something that will then destroy humanity. I would, that's an extreme view. That's the worst possible case. Okay, so that might be the worst possible case. But then there's other people say that, well, this is going to make life easier for everybody. And of course, that's another extreme case. But it always turns out that the answer that we arrive at is somewhere in between, where we avoid the worst and we take advantage of the good. And so this is happening right now. I think the whole thing we're going through with all of these internet devices that we now have is a learning curve. We're just learning how to use it. And I remember my father-in-law, who's the smartest person I've ever met. This guy knew 20 languages fluently. Wow. Right. And he got on the internet, and the first thing he did was fell for a lot of these phishing stuff, right? Because he
Nigerian prince?
I didn't. No, not that. He didn't give any money away. He's not that stupid. No. He was just vulnerable. You have to be inoculated. You have to have heard your friend got caught, and you begin sensitized to what you look for this. You look in the header to find out where it came from, right? And so we're all learning, as a group, how to use the technology, how to avoid the worst part. And I'm sure that this problem with fake news and so forth, there will be issues that we're going to have to overcome. But we have to live through this process. And it may not be. There may be a lot of mistakes. There may be things that really are terrible. But we've always come through on the other end. And by the way, this is something that really Pat's view about where we are today compared to even 100 years ago. We're living in a world where the average age is now over 80 in most developed countries. It's actually going down in the U.S. But the reality is that we've never lived. I mean, no generation has lived better than ours, and except maybe the next. You'll benefit from all these discoveries that are being made now that are going to extend life, that are going to prevent terrible. In fact, by the way, you brought up Ebola. Well, there's an article in the New York Times. Ebola is now a controlled disease because there are now ways, we developed. Actually, it was an experiment was done in Africa that allowed us to come up with the vaccines that have been proven effective. Otherwise, you can't do the experiment, right? It's not ethical. But it was done for us, and now we know.
Are you all optimistic?
Okay, yeah, so let's go around. How many people, let's show of hands. How many people are optimistic about the future? Put up your hand.
You can be both. I think
I mean, in terms of what? Okay.
Optimistic. Black and white.
Let's qualify that.
Yeah, that's far too black and white.
No. I'm making that point. I mean, it's going to be great. You can't take a vote on something like that.
Science is healthy.
Even cell phones, the fact is that if you have a cell phone, there's a whole lot of other pieces of junk you don't have to have. And people used to have their own alarm clock and their own electronic calendar and then they had a phone, and then they had the thing that played the music, and so they've got all of this crap. No, you just have a little phone.
Yeah, but I understand that, but I don't necessarily think that convenience or lengthening of life necessarily correlates to better.
No.
And I think that the easier it is to use and the easier we make it to use these technologies to fundamentally change. Because a nuclear bomb, not everybody in the U.S., not everybody in the world has a button that would drop a bomb, or else we'd see a lot more bombs dropped. but we all have cell phones, and we all have like,
A lot of people have guns.
and they're used a lot. So my argument is that the easier it becomes for us to use this technology, the easier it becomes for us to misuse the technology.
That's true.
Just to keep that in mind.
I want to add something. So, like, even thinking about whether like technology makes us happier or makes the life more convenient or not, even that is a luxury of these days. People didn't have that luxury to think about that.
And then back to the statement I started at the beginning, being able to become brainwashed is exactly what you said. I don't mean in just religion, it's on everything. So we should be educated on, to the best of the human or scientific knowledge, to be educated on everything. Facebook, email, social media, Instagram, or other, even going to a mosque or going to a church, there should be an education on that class or short video. 20 minutes can save our times. If a person at the beginning tell us, hey, this smartphone can make addiction like heroin, with these reasons, when a group of neuroscientists or others conclude on that. So a 20 minutes education can help us to save our time and life in different aspects of life. Religion, social media, interaction, and many other things. Respecting parents or whatever other moral things we care about.
Okay, well, we should. Thank you guys. We should. This is a, what do they call it? It's a wrap.
That's a wrap. It's a wrap.
In the business.
That's what the kids call it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you all. This is a great discussion, and we're gonna.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, we're gonna really, you know, it really, I thought, with to much greater depth than we were able to yesterday.
Oh,
Some of these examples really shined out.
Yeah.
By the way, this will make you happy. What is the the road to happiness? I mean, the royal road to happiness is having low expectations.
Oh yes, of course.
Shoot low.
Ignorance is bliss. Yeah.
And actually, your example is a scientific test of that, right?
Which one?
About Pat's about the.
Oh
chips.
yeah, it was Reed's experiment. Yeah.
If your expectation is
the expectation,
then any Mars bars are good.
Yeah.
It happens very fast.
It happens very fast in that experiment. Yeah, I think it's only about like 5 trials or something to set your expectation.
By the way, there's another experiment along those lines that was done. One of my favorite experiments, which is they had 2 monkeys doing the same task, and one was getting a monkey chow, and the other one was getting grapes, which are really high quality.
Yeah.
And as long as they worked alone, they were quite happy working away. But as soon as the monkey chow saw the other monkey, she went on strike.
They threw it.
Yeah, it was a cucumber. And it was Sarah Brosnan's experiment with Franz Paul. Yeah, it was a capuchin monkey. Yeah.
Capuchin. Okay.
It tossed it at her.
He just pegged it right at her.
And then
Perfectly happy with it.
And then, that's right, and then he banged on the wall, and you know.
You knew what he was thinking.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Oh yeah.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, yeah.
Nice to meet you guys.